Hello, this is Adam Carroll. I work with Justice for All, and we are very aware of the 100 million displaced people in the world. When we ask this Labor Day, who is left behind, we know that many of this 100 million people are not being helped. The Labor Day holiday was instituted not simply as a long weekend, but as a way to celebrate the value of labor in the late 19th century in the United States. In Europe and other countries, it's May Day. Similar idea, the rights of workers, the value of work. However, refugees, unfortunately, are often denied the right to work and are forced to work under the table, if even that. So we're going to talk a bit about that today. A serious subject, but perhaps one that can inform our enjoyment of the holiday in a meaningful way. So I'm going to introduce our first speaker, and that will be followed by a panel uh, discussing a very exciting and useful new report on the global right to work of refugees. Our first guest is Alia Yunus, founder of Yunus Law in New York and a fierce advocate for immigrant rights. As a lawyer and organizer, Ms. Yunus is active with the American Immigration Lawyers Association, hosting Know Your Rights workshops and coordinating coalition building between minority and faith communities. Welcome, sister.
Thank you so much.
Just to reflecting a bit on our faith, on Islam and labor rights, on Islam and the rights of refugees, I just wonder what comes to mind.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I've spoken at mosques throughout the country on this specific topic. And our faith is not only aligned with establishing and fighting for immigrant and refugee rights, but it calls upon us to affirmatively do so. So interestingly enough, people tend to overlook the fact that the Prophet ﷺ himself immigrated from Mecca to Medina. And it's mentioned in the Quran in Surah Al-Hashr that Allah is giving reverence to the people of Medina for accepting the migrants from Mecca who are suffering from persecution and suffering from, the government there was had a boycott on them for many years. And we see this today in countries all over the world. And instead of turning them away, instead of saying, you're going to take our jobs, you're going to take our livelihood, the people of Medina accepted the people of Mecca with open arms, and not only accepted them, but gave them equal of what they had. These specifics are mentioned in the Quran. And so we as Muslims have to take it on, take ownership of our responsibility and our honor to give up what we have to those who are being persecuted or suffering in their own home country.
Unfortunately, in most countries, you see the issue of immigration being very politicized as a wedge issue or a way to divide the population. And certainly we're aware of that in the United States. And you, as an attorney, are aware of the impact on individual lives, people coming across the border or hoping to, but not really being allowed to fully integrate or participate in society here, being pushed to the margins. Before we go to the next, I wondered if you had any thoughts about the situation in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, because immigration is somewhat dictated by the executive branch, it swings every time the president changes. And we do see some progress in the last couple of years, but it's still very slow moving. I mean, asylum seekers who enter the United States, they still have to wait 150 days before they can get a work permit. The processing delays are extreme. And then, a lot of them are forced to work under the table. And even though, we say we're a nation that's, willing and accepting and freedom for all, it's like everyone has the right to pursue happiness unless you're not from here. And so, we are seeing a policy shift, but unfortunately, because immigration policy is so intimately connected with who's in office, it's not very dependable.
Yeah, very difficult. Well, Justice for All, the NGO I work with, runs several human rights advocacy programs, and the most long-standing one is Burma Task Force. So we're very focused in on the rights of the Rohingya, for example, who were forced out of Burma mostly. Some remain in Rakhine State, but for the most part, genocide pushed out over 1 million into Bangladesh. There are others in Malaysia and Thailand and Pakistan and Saudi Arabia and elsewhere. But in Bangladesh, we're very concerned about the lack of rights to work. And so we're going to play a video made just today by our Rohingya associate who lives in the camps. It's a little rough, but I think it gives the voice, it centers the voice of the Rohingya refugees. And let's play the video.
আগে দাদা আর কথা হামরজ গিতে দাদা মানি বড় দাদা মানি এটা কোন ধরা করার মেশিন দিয়ে শুরু তো বড় আনা দাদা হামরজ যেতাম বই তে হাত গেলে দাদা পুলিশ গিয়া মাঝে মাদারা তারা ওইদিকে ভাই হড়জর ফুদার বিনা আর দাদা দুদানা করি দুয়া দাদা টেলা দাদা দিন ধরে দাদা বাজার সাদা হাই হইলে না কইরে দাদা আর দাদা যেতাম বই তুই এখনো দাদা দুর্বল গিয়া হলো তা দাদা যাইতে দাদা দাদা এটা দাদা যখন গিরা দেওয়া দিলে আর তো যাইতে দাদা দাদা করে গিয়া কে মুশকিল মিকা সারে দাদা পাড়া দিয়ে পুলিশ এই আর দাদা গুলি দাদা নেড়া গলে করি না আর বাস টাইম মাতে পুরো নেড়ি গুলি না হয় আর বাজার সাদা দিন দাদা মালিক দাদা যাই দাদা এটা করি হন দাদা নেড়ি করি দুদানা করি আর দাদা ইয়া করি খাই দিয়ে আর কি
Good evening, everyone. I am Abdullah, a refugee from the world's largest refugee camp. I am raising my community voice through photography and videography. Besides, I am an associate for the Burmese Task Force and Justice for All. On this Labor Day, I would like to share some words about the struggling life in the camp. Among the 1 million refugee camp, Rohingya always try to work and earn themselves through daily work and farming. And 2 years now, Rohingya do not have the work to do in the camp since Bangladesh government restricted movement and destroy the markets inside the camp. On behalf of the Rohingya workers, I'd like to request the humanitarian workers, humanitarian actors across the globe to create livelihood and to allow employment opportunities for the Rohingya people in the Bangladesh refugee camp. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. Era বাঁকের মধ্যে হাজগরি যে এখন ৬০০০ ধরে বেতন পাইতেছে এখন ১৬ জন মানুষ হইয়ালে এরা এখন আঠিয়াই না পারি বুঝলাম দিয়া দেব বেতন বেশি দিয়া বেশি সুন্দর করি এরা মানে খাম খরচ করি ফেলছিলাম তো এখন পয়সা সময় গিয়ে খাম খরচও যদি বেশ হয়ে গিয়ে আগর হিন দিলেও যদি ১২,০০০ টাকার ধরে হাঁস করছিলাম দিয়ে হাসিং এখনও যদি হাসিং করা করে ১২,০০০ হিসাবে তো ১০০ ঘন্টা হাঁস গড়া করে দিই ন যদি দবিদস্ত হাসি মহিলা নিজা করে মহিলা পৌঁছায় নিজে আর বাদে দামি দিয়া মাঝে এরাব করি মাফি দিয়া করি বেখিন দিলে বেশ বাগে না পারে কম বাগে পারে তাই তারপরে আর এই বাতেরিয়া ওদের লেবার সদি তার ইজ্জত আছে না ইয়াক কেন লেবার সদি তার কোনো ইজ্জত নাই ইয়াতে গেলে দুধ দিতেছে উঠতে গেলে দুধ দিতেছে মানে কি হিন ওরে বদাস করি ওরে চলিয়ে দি অন বুঝো না লেবার সদিবার কোনো দাম নাই অনলের সাহায্য হইলে মতো আর ফলানা বাই খরচ ধরে কই আর তুমি আর ইচ্ছা করো দি
So that's a powerful statement right there from a Rohingya worker who's struggling to even be allowed to work and notices that the wages have gone way down, not unrelated to the restrictions on the right to work. So we'll get back to Sister Alia Yunus a little later in the program, but right now we're going to move on and talk to the panel first to look at the global situation. How is it in various countries? It's a really exciting report that was just completed by a collaboration between several organizations: Center for Global Development, Refugees International, Asylum Access. And so I'm going to ask our speakers, I'll do a brief intro. Their bios are very interesting, and so I think I am going to read some of the bios here. Bahati Kanyamanza is an Associate Director of Partnership at Asylum Access. Born in the Democratic Republic of Congo, he has witnessed injustices and atrocities in his home country. In 1999, at the age of 14, he became a refugee in Uganda, where he lived for 17 years. He became a refugee for the second time after being resettled in the US in 2016. His experience as a refugee motivated him to become an educator and advocate of refugees' human rights. A trained teacher and lawyer, Bahati is a co-founder of CIOTA, a nonprofit organization that supports conflict-affected youth and children. He is also a founding member of the refugee-led organization network in Uganda. The next speaker, Sarah Miller, is a senior fellow with Refugees International, where she covers the Great Lakes and Horn of Africa, as well as global governance of refugee policies. She has consulted for UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, the ILO, the World Bank, the IRC, and Mercy Corps, and has worked in refugee issues with think tanks and various NGOs in the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, and Asia. She's a term member of Council of Foreign Relations and has helped with displacement-related projects at USAID and the U.S. Department of State. Sarah is currently adjunct faculty with Fordham University and Georgetown University. And last but not least, Martha Guerrero is an advocate for Refugees International, who focuses on expanding labor market access to refugees. Martha is a graduate from Georgetown's Master of Science in Foreign Service, where she focused on the intersection of development and humanitarian issues. During her studies, Martha interned at the International Organization for Migration in Burma, where she worked in labor displacement and skills development programs. Prior to Georgetown, Martha focused on urging the private sector towards development outcomes. She has also worked with female-led startups in Mexico City. So really great bios and experience, and very excited to have you all to have a conversation. So I will just toss it to the group and ask one of you to come forward and to speak about how did this come together, and how did your organization find its way to this collaboration?
Great. I'm happy to jump in. It's great to join you all. Thank you so much for having us on this important topic, really timely with Labor Day upon us, and really important to talk about at the global and local level perspective and in our own local communities. As you mentioned, this is a collaboration between Refugees International, the Center for Global Development, and Asylum Access. And it comes from an important project we have called the Labor Market Access Project that Refugees International and the Center for Global Development have been carrying out for the past few years and are continuing in the next few years. And the focus is exactly what we've discussed. How can we improve refugee access to the labor market? We know that in many cases, there are barriers that really obstruct people's ability to access livelihood opportunities. And we also know that in most refugee situations, people are stuck in long-term scenarios where their rights are severely curtailed, including freedom of movement and the right to work, both of which are essential to accessing the labor market. So we wanted to really zoom out and look globally. Asylum Access, and Bahati can talk about this, has done some global level work on this prior to this project. And the idea was to assess as many countries as we could with a methodology that was robust, bringing in survey respondents from NGOs, from governments, civil society, as many people as we could get to respond. We covered 51 countries, of which those countries are hosting some 87% of the world's refugees as of the end of 2021. And we were able to cover quite a bit. So it was a great collaboration. And we have other colleagues who were not able to be on this call, but really with a focus of understanding the de facto and de jure, right? So the access in what's on paper in law and in reality, how is it really carried out? How are people able to access their labor market rights? So that was an overview of the collaboration. Martha and Bahati, maybe you want to add something else.
Well, I'm going to jump in as well very quickly. Refugees International has been also engaged on livelihoods and refugees economic inclusion even before this initiative. We have conducted extreme research on countries like Turkey. We have engaged in other areas of the world as South Sudan, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Colombia, Peru, everywhere in the world to figure out what are the conditions for refugees. And access to livelihoods has always been a key priority for refugees. So whenever we conduct surveys or talk with refugees, you ask them, like, what is the top priority for you? What do you need? And all they tell you is, I need work. I need access to incomes. I need a place to live and afford a decent life. So this project came about, and we're extremely lucky to collaborate with Asylum Access, with Bahati and the team in Asylum Access, to gather a lot of information about how can refugees find these livelihoods and find better opportunities and allow them to thrive, but also to contribute to their host countries.
Happy to jump in. Thank you so much for hosting us. Asylum Access is an international non-profit organization. We are dedicated to making refugee rights a reality. We empower refugees in Africa, Asia, Latin America to live safely, work, send children to school, and build their lives. Asylum Access care about these issues, and that's why we exist. We exist to making sure that refugees enjoy these rights like any other person, right to work, be able to go to school, be able to earn a living. We believe that refugees and all other displaced groups of people should be treated fairly like any other human being elsewhere. This initiative started way back in 2011. We care so much about these issues, and we want to make sure that our work, we work to make sure that these refugees and all other forcibly displaced groups of people have the rights they can have. We work with governments to make sure that at least they put in place policies and laws that allow refugees to enjoy their rights like another person. So over the years, we have worked on these issues, and we make sure that at least we work with other entities, institutions, civil society organizations, donor governments, to making sure that they understand that these are issues we care about. These are human beings like any other human beings who deserves to be protected under the law.
Great. Thank you, Bahati. And we're going to get into specifics in just a minute, but stay tuned just for a couple of messages. Thank you. And this is Adam Carroll. We're speaking about the right of refugees to work. The show is seeing who is left out of Labor Day. And unfortunately, 100 million refugees often lack the right to work as well as the opportunity to work. So we're talking about the new report. And I wanted to begin in reverse order with Bahati. As a refugee yourself, do you recall any experiences, whether they're personal or your friends or family, in which you really couldn't have access to work, or at least to good work?
Thank you so much for the question. Refugees go through so many issues. I remember for so many years, I've been a refugee for 23 years, and these are some of the issues most organizations we are really trying to make sure that we address. As a refugee, as a young man, as a refugee in Uganda, I remember a scenario where my late father, after harvesting corn with fellow farmers in my refugee camp, in my former refugee camp in Uganda, put together their corn. A season takes 6 months from planting to harvesting. And what happened was they wanted to put together their corn so that at least they sell them together so that they are not cheated individually. So they wanted to have that bargaining power. So they had to go through a middleman, a businessman, a Ugandan who was supposed to connect them to the market. Unfortunately, the middleman had to take every single coin from the sale, and my father, his friends, his friend farmers from the refugee camp did not get any single money from the refugee camp, from the sale. And this is a challenge where refugees are not protected by the law. They could not sue, they could not go to the police because most times, as we are going to talk about, there are no laws, there are no frameworks that allow refugees to be able to exercise their rights and access justice. So I think there are so many cases out there, so many refugees who face these challenges. They cannot sue, they cannot claim for their fair pay, they cannot be able to move from around the refugee camp to sell their produce outside the refugee camp because there are these encampment policies that do not allow refugees to move freely. And these are the issues we are speaking about in this report.
Well, that's a shocking and disappointing example, but I'm sure not uncommon, the exploitation of those with the least amount of power. And we see that so many refugees are in refugee camps. And those, of course, are increasingly like prisons. Others are living in the shadows in various countries. And yes, we always have to find good things to say about refugee host countries, but unfortunately the policies are usually very imperfect. So I wanted to ask about the track record of some countries, some examples, specific examples, including some Muslim nations, both good and bad examples. I was wondering if you had some thoughts, Martha.
Yes, of course. I think what we find overall is that 55% of refugees live in countries that restrict their access to work, and at least 19% live in countries that severely restrict this access to work. So we are seeing a situation in a world panoramic that refugees themselves, like, they cannot find possibilities to work in practice. And it's important to differentiate the two situations we have. We have the law, what the law dictates, and also the practical side. And the practical side, the law might say you are allowed to work or you might not be allowed to work, and that's one aspect of it. But then the other story is, in practice, can refugees work even in informal sectors? And in some countries they can, but in some others we see a continuation of restrictions, such as the example that we were hearing before of the story of Bangladesh, where even informal work of people trying to get by through maybe opening a shop, even within the camp, or as a day laborer outside the camp, working in agriculture or any other job that they can get to get by, these rights and that possibility to even get informal job is even curtailed. We have other examples. For instance, a positive example we can see in Jordan, where the country originally did not legally allow refugees to work. And then with the Jordan Compact, we saw some improvement in the legal framework that allowed refugees to work in some sectors of the economy. And while this law was not perfect, it didn't allow all refugees to work freely and really join the labor market. We can see some positive outcomes of these permits, and now all the sectors have been unrestricted, and we see Syrian refugees being able to find employment and join the labor market more easily than if they didn't have these permits. Another example, and I think we talked about it before, was also the case of Malaysia, where even informal work, refugees can have access to informal work. They're legally not allowed to work. They're not even recognized as refugees. And in Malaysia, what we see is also that even in informal work, there's detentions, there's harassment, and informality for refugees that are not recognized also leads to a lot of exploitation and abuse. So we've seen some cases of employers retaining the salaries or just not paying people for their work just because they know that they don't have any legal protections to ensure that their rights and the rights as workers and their rights as individuals are protected. So it's really a situation that varies from country to country. And sometimes while informality allows an avenue for refugees to work, in informality, we can also see a lot of exploitation and abuse, especially when the government does not recognize refugee status and refugees.
I was wondering if I could ask Sarah to jump in. And also, we were just showing the map. And if we could put that up just for a moment again. And maybe, Sarah, you could explain what the map is.
Yeah, thanks for focusing on that. So this covers the countries that we've looked at. And we tried to come up with rankings that help describe people's access to the labor market according to, again, de jure, what's written on paper in the law versus de facto. And so you can see we took into account various factors. We did both a literature review and we spoke to as many people as we could with a survey to help determine these rankings. As you can see, it's not divided by income level. Some wealthier countries and some lower income countries, there's a lot of variance between the countries. And it really helps us give a sense of how well refugees, in some cases, other displaced groups are able to access the labor market. As Martha touched on, this disparity between de jure and de facto is a key feature of the report, but informality is another important aspect. In many of these countries, people are working informally, meaning not in the formal sector with a work permit, et cetera. And that's quite common among the host community as well. Maybe this is particularly common in agricultural sector. Certainly, we see this across many refugee hosting countries, that the host community and refugees are both working informally. In some cases, this is common and works well. In other cases, as Martha said, this leaves them open to exploitation and abuse. So that's a really important aspect. Documentation does matter.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, to clarify the color coding, I guess green is the best. Yellow is the next level. Red is not so good. And then purple is just the worst. Who gets the purple, by the way?
I can't see on the map. Is that Tanzania?
Tanzania.
Yeah, I think it is Tanzania. Sorry, it's small on my screen, but I think that's right. And where we've seen more egregious violations, yeah, thank you. It zooms in very well. And you can look through the report and see the different countries, and we give some overview of how we determined these scores. And the scores are not to make people focus on the number, but to really highlight how well people are able to access their rights. I should add that there's a number of other really important issues. We've highlighted encampment, right? Are people in an urban setting or are they in a camp setting? That makes a big difference. We've highlighted in some cases, in some countries, there are a number of climate-related issues. There's widespread internal displacement. A country like Chad that has made a lot of legislative progress also has a number of IDPs, we call them internally displaced persons, who are also languishing without labor market access. One other point I want to emphasize that comes out in the study, but also throughout our entire project, is that we're not just, making the case for access to the labor market because it's, the moral right thing to do, though we do think accessing people's rights is critical. It also makes economic sense. And in a lot of our country level reports, we highlight the contributions that displaced people, refugees in particular, can make to the local economies and even at the national level. And so making the case from a financial perspective is also really important here, that it's not just about people having access to their rights, but it also makes fiscal sense for countries to enable refugees to access the labor market as well.
I understand they're debating that this week in Australia, or at least that the BBC was talking about this morning. I was curious, if we zoom onto Turkey, because of course Turkey has taken in a lot of Syrians. Could somebody zoom into Turkey, which is right there, Eastern Mediterranean? Let's just see. I just see how to use this. So you've got the de jure, which is it's party to all major refugee conventions, which is better than many. And then there's details. But then scrolling down, then it gets to the de facto, which has less of a good score. And that's interesting. I wonder why that is.
Turkey is a really interesting case. Yeah, and I'll offer one thought on it. Maybe my colleagues have other perspectives, but we know they've taken in large numbers of refugees, and in some ways, credit should go where it's due, and in other ways, in many cases, what looks like a good situation is still very difficult for many refugees. For example, work permits are often held with the employer. So if I am a refugee and I access a job, if I find a job with a company, I have to stay there in that location with that company. I can't go to another city or go to another place, or I might lose my work permit, and that company would need to go. I'd have to find a new company that would go and make a new application for me, which again, perhaps on paper means people have technical access, but in reality means very few people are going to be able to access it. So Turkey is definitely an interesting case. We also highlight some of the child labor concerns as well that are present in Turkey.
Yeah, well, I know that your study addresses refugee rights in a very large percentage of the world's refugee population, but not all. What percentage are you studying in this?
These 51 countries cover 87% of the world's refugees based on the 2021 numbers. Yeah. So it's
that's impressive. Yeah, that's very useful. And I hope that policymakers in the United Nations and elsewhere will find this a useful tool, and that activists will also be able to work in each country to push for more rights, more employment rights for refugees and asylum seekers. We're going to take a break just for a moment to have some station identification and some other messages. But when we get back, I'm going to ask Sister Alia Yunus to also join the conversation and talk a bit about how perhaps we can use this report as activists, as community members who care about the refugees. How can we improve the situation for them? So we'll be right back. And we're back. Adam Carroll here. On Labor Day, who will be left behind? Unfortunately, many. And we're talking with experts on refugee employment worldwide. And I'm going to ask Sister Alia Yunus to join the conversation now. What do you think we can do in our messaging? Or is it not about messaging? It's just about brute power? How can we change the policies in some, especially in the Muslim nations, which are restricting rights, but there's no basis in Islam to these restrictions. So what do you think we can do?
It's such a complicated question. I do a lot of grassroots organizing on the state level in New Jersey and New York, and we have this saying to use the ballot, the body, or the buck. So whenever you're trying to implement change and make a dent in the wall of injustice, you tackle all three aspects. And I think this report is instrumental in first creating awareness. I know most people don't even know that this is happening, and understanding the kind of, I would say, importance of how access to the labor market can really transform these people's lives more than anything else. And so number one, I think, is just about creating awareness and getting the knowledge and supporting organizations that are doing this work on the ground. I mean, people say, like, I live here, like, what am I going to do for people in the Democratic Republic of Congo? Well, the answer is there are people in the Democratic Republic of Congo doing this exact work. So it's important to take some time. I always say inventory your life, put it into a pie, and make one of those pieces, dedicated to giving to sharing and being in service, which is an instrumental principle of Islam and our faith. And so, finding out which organization is on the ground, have boots on the ground, doing the work, funding these research projects, funding studies that are creating awareness. So there's a lot that can be done. It starts with intention, just like everything in our faith. Everything starts with setting the intention and then committing to actually being in service of someone other than yourself.
And Bahati, speaking of whether it's faith-based or not, partnership building. How do you see activists in the countries that you know best, U.S., African countries? How can they use this report?
I think the most important thing is to know that we are just one humanity. Whether we are Muslim, Christians, Hindu, we are all human beings who want the best for our lives. Whether we are immigrants, we are nationals of a country, we all want to be happy and we all want livelihoods to make sure that we provide for our families and ourselves. So I think there are so many things we can do with this report. We are talking about work rights for so many people who are affected by displacement issues, and these issues we don't know who is going to be next. Yesterday it was me. Next could be someone. I think understanding that we're a global village and each one of us has a role to play, no matter where we are. I think most times we have been asked, what can I do? I think it has just been mentioned that having the intention that I want to do something at different levels. So number one, we have to make sure that our countries have better policies that allow immigrants and refugees to thrive in the countries when we receive them. In most times we see arguments that refugees are coming to take our jobs and all other elements that they are coming to depend on the government systems. No, for the 23 years I've been a refugee, I've not seen a refugee who doesn't want to work. We all want to go out there, work, go to school, and make sure that our families are happy. I was reading an article where they are saying that Afghans who have been resettled to the US are likely to contribute hundreds of millions of dollars into the US economy. Refugees are an asset. We come with the skills, we come with opportunities, and we are able to contribute to social economic development of our countries. What we need is just an opportunity. We need the chance. We want to make sure that the policies and frameworks are working. Having them on paper is one thing, but making sure that they are also working is another thing. And that's what we see in the report. We see some countries have good policies, but when it comes to implementation, it becomes an issue. And that's why organizations like Asylum, Center for Global Development, and Refugee International, we are making sure that at least we hold accountable these countries and making sure that they respect international law, human rights, and making sure that they commit to the policy promises they made. And that's why we are going out there speaking about this, engaging institutions like the World Bank. And actually, from the time we initiated this campaign in 2011, this wasn't an issue spoken as an issue facing refugees. But along the way, we see the World Bank coming up with millions of dollars through Window for Refugees and Host Communities to help host governments that are hosting a number of refugees countries to be able to support and provide for them. We see institutions like big donor governments like the US, they are making this as a priority. The UNHCR, the UN Refugee Agency, they are doing the same. But this is not just because they are aware about these issues. We came out and they were able to do this. So I think each one of us has a role to play from the community, from individuals like us. Organizations like us, we depend on purely individual donations and grants. Without people donating to our work, we can't exist. And we exist to making sure that to address some of these issues. And I think they are very important for us to continue engaging and seek support from the public and from different areas.
Yeah, I hear you about civil society and needing support, and grassroots needing, as Sister Afia said, to implement those 3 Bs. What were they again? Bodies, ballot, and bucks?
Yeah.
Yes.
So your money,
So
your
really,
effort, and voting.
yeah. But what about the policy level? And I guess I'll toss this question to Sarah, because your bio includes a lot of work, with different levels, with government, with international community, with civil society, and so forth. So these different roles create or sustain different perspectives. So obviously, we want everyone to be working together for the right ends, empowering and helping refugees. But what would you say in reflecting on the different roles of these different sectors? What would you like to see happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think you're hitting on something that's important, because it's not just organizations like our NGOs and those who, do advocacy, who need to be working on this. There really needs to be a multi-tiered effort to improve refugee access to their rights. And so that can include, as Bahati mentioned, some of the different big actors like financing institutions like the World Bank that are taking increasingly active roles in this space that had largely been just the traditional humanitarian actors for a long time. It includes the private sector that we've been working hard to engage, meeting with companies and others who work in the business sector. How can they take more responsibility in hiring refugees and helping them, training them, accessing their skills and experiences that they already bring, and improving their access to education so they can access the labor market. Perhaps banks, right? And depending on the country, it includes, can refugees get a small business loan to open up a shop or to carry out some of the work that they have done. Martha could speak about a study that she has done on credentialing healthcare professionals. They looked in the Latin America context, and how, again, it wouldn't just help that refugee community, but particularly in the COVID context where there was a shortage of doctors and nurses, credentialing, so respecting the credentials of a Venezuelan migrant who is now in Colombia as a nurse to help in a COVID response or in a clinic that's understaffed or in the medical sphere. So there's a lot of opportunities there. Again, at the policy level, though, states really do need to get legislation passed that both embraces what we know is outlined in the international legal norms, the rights and treaties that many sign on to, including the Refugee Convention and other human rights documents, but it needs to be enshrined in domestic law as well so that it's carried out. And what we have found is that it's really critical, even if something is passed at the national level, like we're seeing in Kenya right now. There was major legislation passed last year, but how it's carried out on the local level. Do local officials understand it and know about it? And how are they carrying it out is where it really is important for the lives of refugees. I think states can also pressure other states, so countries that are more open to refugee access to the labor market can encourage other states, perhaps through leveraging other types of economic interests to encourage them to improve their policies, and in many cases respect what they have already put down in their international and national legal documents. So those are some of the important aspects.
Yeah, I wish more of them had signed on to the Refugee Convention. That's one problem with Malaysia and Bangladesh not having signed that. But Martha, yeah, what would you like to add there?
I think an important topic that we've all touched upon is attitudes, right? What is the public opinion, and how me as a citizen of a country support refugees? And normally we do this through our votes, right? Do we vote for a candidate that really uses migrants and uses refugees as scapegoats to pass laws and blame them because of the economy, because of COVID? And I think that we see this increasing narrative that it is the fault of refugees, that it is the fault of migrants, that jobs are not available, that the COVID pandemic is spreading. And that is not the reality. The reality is that when we see displaced people like refugees in a host country, they're not there to take the jobs of locals. On the contrary, if evidence shows in so many contexts, like there was a study on Malaysia, we had a study on Colombia, in Peru, in so many contexts where it shows that refugees add to the economy, and it shows that refugee integration and allowing refugees to work actually will create more jobs, will create more fiscal gains and fiscal revenue for the host country, will uplift the overall economy. So it will increase more opportunities for all. And by actually leaving refugees outside the labor market, countries are incurring in cost because these refugees need to depend on aid to survive, because they cannot be self-reliant. So expanding labor market access, allowing refugees to become self-reliant, allowing refugees to work, not only will allow them to have a better life, to provide for their families, to thrive, but also will allow them to contribute to their host communities. We have refugees that are doctors that come with skills, and normally these skills are not transferable. When they are displaced, they cannot use their professional credentials to work in their professions in their host country, or if they had a special skill in their country of origin, normally those skills are not transferred for them to work in the same profession once they get to the new country. And we see this in most of the countries of the study. If I think in all of the countries of the study, we see this case where refugees are not able to transfer the skills and knowledge. And I think like this is so important. And one of the best ways that we can start taking action is by really getting educated and really talking with refugee and displaced communities to understand what they go through and see them as human, because ultimately they're not our enemy. They're not here to take away from our pie. They're here to make the pie larger. And then another part of the policy discussion that I think is very important, and I think it comes a lot into mind where we think of countries as Pakistan or Bangladesh, is that many refugees are not going to leave in the short term. And I think there's an aspect that we need to acknowledge, the fact that displacement is getting protracted. So in the case of Pakistan, you have Afghan refugees living there for 40 years, and the country is still not acknowledging that they're probably going to stay there. And you have the children of refugees being born and raised there in Pakistan and are not getting Pakistani citizenship. And we are going to see this as well in countries like Bangladesh, where the government thinks of constant repatriation, and I'm not going to integrate them because they have to return. And the reality is that integration will make things better for everyone, allowing them to work, allowing them to get education, allowing them to transfer their skills and bring their skills and knowledge to their host community will really improve conditions for everyone. And we're talking not only about a humanitarian situation, we're talking about broader development. So how can we align these two goals? And I think one big aspect of it is how do we change our perception of refugees and how we acknowledge them not only as people in need, but as individuals that are there to contribute to their host communities and have a lot to bring.
Very good point about investing in refugees being a very smart decision, and I'm very aware that Bangladesh, the government hasn't seen it in those terms, sad to say, withholding education as well as employment from the Rohingya. And I think that, when we see, the kids don't have any food, they're just, living life, but treat almost like animals, where they, just are being fed. As our video in the beginning said, the video is mentioned that the World Food Program provides some food, but it isn't enough, and they don't have any things. Would you want your family to have no things? It's like, what kind of standard is that? And so, really acknowledging the humanity and the dignity of the other, of our guests, the refugee not making those artificial distinctions. So important to keep promoting that idea. And I hope that the ILO and IOM and various other actors will work together to promote this better vision and these better policies. So yeah.
I think I would like to mention, if you allow me as well, is the aspect, and I think one of the interviewees at the beginning of the program talked about they were informal workers only in low skill type of jobs like construction, like agriculture. They're treated as second-class citizens, and I think that is a story for many refugees around the world. And I think we need to start thinking as well about formalization, because informality does allow refugees a solution, a temporary solution to get by. But in informality, there's so many challenges. There's exploitation, there is abuse, and there is also this sense of like, oh, you're a refugee, you're not good enough, you're not capable enough. And I think that there's nothing more far away from reality. So I think acknowledging that refugees can also enter the formal sector, and not only granting these work permits, but recognizing them and recognizing these skills. And I think in so many of these countries where we see a yellow, for instance, in our map, that they're kind of right in the middle, we see that, yes, maybe refugees do have jobs because they're working informally, but how many of them are able to jump to formality and are able to just really have very stable jobs where their incomes are sufficient to get by, where they don't get discriminated because of their nationality and their status as refugees? And I think that aspect of when are we not only going to allow them to just work, but also think of the dignity of that work and the quality of that work. And I think refugees do have the right for us as an international community to acknowledge this and have these difficult discussions that we normally don't have.
Yeah, I mean, here, even in New York, if somebody wants to save money, it's not uncommon to hear them say, "Oh, let's get some Mexicans," and without them considering what that really represents. It's the tip of an iceberg of exploitation. And yes, people want to save money. And yes, that provides a job for some people. But what is our attitude towards that? Anyway, it's Labor Day coming, and it's an opportunity to reflect on the labor movement, which is not just organizing in Starbucks and Amazon warehouses, though that's very important, but it also needs to include the 100 million displaced people of the world. So I'm just going to give a couple of minutes for any of you who want to just add something that we didn't get included and you want to make sure it's included in the discussion. So I open the floor to you all.
I would just offer one thought, which I appreciate how you ended on kind of a note on humanity. And it was a quote that I've heard many times from, I'm not sure who it's attributed to originally, but it's the notion that how we as a society treat refugees and other displaced groups is really a litmus test for our society's compassion and kindness. And so I think it's a good way to really gut check ourselves on how we're treating those who are coming to our shores. And we can certainly reflect on that here in the US, where we have a long ways to go. And this study is also trying to get other parts of the world to continue to think about these issues as well. So I'm really glad we were able to focus on this. Thank you.
Any other last comments before we sign off?
Of course, I think this is a topic that we can continue talking about for ages. And I'm very, very thankful for the invitation and the platform to really discuss this important issue. I think as a community, we started talking about refugee work rights and their contributions to their host countries, and started trying to shift the way that we thought in the response back in 2016, 2017. And then we had the global pandemic, and it seemed like the world shut down, and then no one could have a job. everyone had to stay home, and refugees were sadly amongst the most affected of this pandemic. So we are really, this May Day, we're really in a great time to rethink where refugees stand, how do we treat our refugees communities, and how do we welcome refugees, and to acknowledge the fact that allowing refugees to work and including them in the economy is not only the right thing to do, but it's also the smart thing to do for everyone. So thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, and thanks for all your organizations which do such great work. Bahati, would you like to say a last?
Yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity. My last word is that I would like to see a system overhaul. A system we need to see is a transformed global system of displacement response that prioritizes the human rights of displaced people and recognizes their power. In that system, we would want to see refugees' meaningful participation to affect that change, because even if we do this without them, it won't make an impact. We want to see refugees leaders, we want to see them getting opportunities to run their initiatives. I remember back in my refugee camp, I had a gentleman who ran a business equivalent to 55,000 US dollars, but we struggled to get a loan of 5,000 US dollars for him to improve on his business. That was ridiculous for me, someone who had worked hard to raise 55,000 US dollars, but he could not get 5,000 US dollars to improve his business. So I think refugees have to be part of this, have to be engaged, they have to take lead. We have been talking about skills and the opportunities they come with. You have to take advantage of that if we want to see the real change happening. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. And, these days, refugees do have cell phones often, and it's not impossible to get in daily touch with them and to talk and hear what they really need. And I think that, they will show you, if you send a donation directly to them, which is often possible, they will show you where it goes. It's very direct and very impressive. They want to work and they want to have a better life, and perhaps we can help. So, Sister Afia, would you like a last word?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on saying thank you. Thank you to Justice for All and the organizations responsible for this report. If you are watching, I think the first step is to visit the site and kind of flip through the report, just to kind of create, like I said, create that awareness around what exactly is going on in the world. Sometimes we live in our own bubble. And like you said, Adam, I think, even just here in the US, there's a plethora of refugee relief organizations, resettlement programs that you can participate in on the local level, on the state level, on the national level, and on the international level. It's very, with the advancement of technology, like you said, it's quite amazing how you can have an intimate connection with someone thousands and thousands of miles away. And that experiential knowledge, I think, is really key, because that's what's going to push the narrative, which pushes policy. And I really appreciated that the report differentiated between de jure and de facto, because it's that on the ground implementation of the policy that really makes a difference. And so we, as people on the ground, I feel like it's kind of a circle where we can make a difference initially in pushing the narrative, which changes the policy, which is then implemented. So you can have an impact on both ends of that circle. So, really just tap into that gut check and that humanity, and understanding that we should all have the right to pursue happiness, and an equal right to pursue happiness. And what we want for our children is what we should want for everyone. And it comes from a source of love and humanity that's innate in everybody. And we've been kind of suffocating that for too long, and just let it overflow and really tap into that. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, and thank you all. If viewers want to visit justiceforall.org, feel free to ask any questions as far as referrals. And by the way, Afia, do you do, speaking of tech, do you do Know Your Rights workshops on Zoom?
I do, yeah. I
So
do.
you may want to contact Sister Afia for those because they're so useful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we do all types of Know Your Rights workshops, so.
Great. Well, all right. Thank you all. Thank you for the viewers. And I hope that this has been helpful and will more and enjoy. So thank you very much.